So thank you everybody for coming to this seminar on cocktail competitions. My name's Eric Kozlik. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Direct Fire Consulting. I help liquid brands, so cocktail bars, but also distilleries. And I recently partnered with the Virginia Spirits Board to help put on the 2024 Virginia Cocktail Games. So the first time doing a statewide cocktail competition, and we brought together distilleries and bartenders here in Virginia, and it was a pretty big deal, pretty good time, I think. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get in. I'm going to do a lot of talking here, but I'm going to be here for the rest of the evening. So if you have any questions for me and you want to sit down for a sidebar, come grab me. Happy to chat. What we're going to cover today, I'm going to start big picture, talking about why you might want to compete in cocktail competitions. A number of folks in this room already have competed. Good to see you all. And then we're going to talk about some of the variables that you'll encounter in different types of cocktail competitions. Not all are created equal in the same ways. Some are better for certain things, others are better for certain other things. We're going to talk about those variables. Then towards the end, when it comes to building a flavor story with your cocktail and presentation tactics for impressing judges, whether those judges are the masses in a People's Choice context or a panel of professional judges, we'll talk about tactics that will get that accomplished. The first thing though, the one true thing that I encounter with every cocktail competition that I've ever put on or judged at in the last 6-7 years, DC, Maryland, Virginia, lots of different styles of cocktail competitions, is that they're a ton of work no matter what side you're on. So whether I'm giving the evil twin version of this to distillers and brands and organizations who might want to put on their own cocktail competition, or whether I'm talking to you right here, right now, it's a ton of work. And my frustration is often when I see people who engage in a cocktail competition, again, from any side of it, and they don't know exactly what they want to get out of it. They want to do it because it seems like a good idea, but they're not working toward a specific goal. So it's going to be a different journey for each of you to figure out what your goal is professionally. And I'll give you a few ways to think about that in just a moment. But, it's important to point out that pretty much everything you as a bartender are going to do for a cocktail competition is unpaid work, right up until that moment when you are the winner, which is never guaranteed. There's a lot of variables in between the moment you decide that you are going to put together a cocktail competition submission and the moment when you bring home the gold, whatever that means. So I know that if I'm going to engage in labor that is not guaranteed to give me a paycheck in any sort of scheduled way, I get a little bit nervous, and I tend to want to be pretty explicit about what the potential upsides are and what the definite or potential downsides are going to be. So here are some tactics that I use and that you could potentially employ in figuring out how you want to approach your cocktail competition portfolio. Because great, you enter one cocktail competition, so what? If you're gonna participate in cocktail competitions, it makes sense to have a strategy that you can scale to multiple competitions and that you can use to build momentum in your own career, right? So one strategy that is probably the easiest to deploy is to have some sort of, can be physical if you're a crafty person. I am personally not very crafty, but to have some sort of vision board of where your career is heading in the next 5 to 10 years. Cocktail competitions are great for raising your profile, but if you don't have a sense of the trajectory that you're looking to kind of go on in the next 5 to 10 years of your professional career, you can't really make strategic choices to move from point A where you are now to point B where you'd like to be. This is more of a gut feeling thing. So if you can put together some sort of trajectory in your mind of like, okay, here I am right now, here's where I want to be in 5 or 10 years, even if it's not, I want to be the head bartender at the original Death & Co. in New York, even if it's not that granular or specific, you can still run cocktail competitions through that litmus test and say, does this seem like it fits naturally on that trajectory that I'm envisioning? It's a gut check. On the other hand, you could take a more structured approach. You could say, all right, I've never done a cocktail competition before. I'm going to start out with the digital competitions, which are the lowest kind of cost of entry and the lowest barrier to entry, I should say, and sort of the easiest to kind of dip your feet into. And then once I achieve some sort of success with a digital competition or two, whatever success looks like to you, Then maybe I'll start to scale my efforts to some of the more live regional competitions or some of the big brand competitions. This is a building blocks approach that is a little bit more structured than like just a little vision board type thing. So whether you're structured or more of an intuitive person, you can still insert a little bit of control over how you go about these cocktail competitions. Then in terms of your time, there's generally two types of people that I encounter. There's people for whom time is an abundant resource, and then there are people for whom time is the most valuable thing that they are trying to protect. If you are the kind of person who has time as an abundant resource, one of the things that I'd recommend is that you assert some sort of limit or quota on how you approach cocktail competitions. Because if you're like, cocktail competitions, I never thought that this was a way that I could advance my career, I'm going to apply to every one that I can get my hands on. Well, suddenly you're spread way too thin, you're not putting the quality in where it matters. So if you can put some sort of quota or limit on your approach to cocktail competitions and say, I'm only going to do one per quarter, or I'm only ever going to have 2 active applications to cocktail competitions at any given time, so that if I become a finalist in one or both of those competitions, I can put my best foot forward and not be spread super thin. That's a valuable thing. Even if you think time is your most valuable resource, if you just squander it, then suddenly you're strapped for that. If you're the kind of person that values time really highly, I put myself in that camp, because I never seem to have enough hours in a day to get done what I need to. One of the things that I do to try and evaluate the opportunities that come my way is I put an hourly rate on my time. And this is not to say that every cocktail competition, when you look at the grand prize, that grand prize needs to have some relationship to the hourly rate that you would put in. It's not quite that simple. It's more about saying, all right, it's going to take me probably 3 or 4 hours to develop this cocktail. It's going to cost me $40 at the liquor store to go pick up the bottle. It's going to cost me $20 of ingredients at the grocery store. And you add that up and you look at that lump sum based on the hourly rate, the amount of time it's going to take you, and the ingredients and other financial inputs that it's going to cost you to create this submission. And then you can say, does this quantity, this dollar amount that's a combination of time and resources, am I happy spending this even if I don't win this competition? So it's a little bit different, but it's a way of valuing your own time, and it scales down the road. This is the type of mindset that will serve you well in a consulting or in any sort of situation where you have to draw boundaries and tell people and communicate what you're worth. So some ways to think about approaching cocktail competitions from a large scale. Getting into the types, I'm going to start with the lowest kind of barrier to entry, probably lowest benefit, and then move all the way up through the big leagues. Along the way, I'm going to have some spotlights. Starting with digital competitions, the nice thing is the ease of application. So if anybody applied for the Virginia Cocktail Games, the first phase of it was basically your run-of-the-mill digital competition, right? You just fill out a Google form, or in many contexts, you're going to send just a piece of media that doesn't take all that long for you to put together to a social media account, and boom, you're off to the races. In terms of what you really want to invest in with the digital competition, it's technology. And when I say invest in technology, I'm not telling you it's important to go out and spend $1,000 on a camera and $2,000 on an expensive lens. What I mean by investing in technology is that you want to find small buys that you can do to increase the way that you deploy technology in the creation of your media, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say, going back a slide or two, my strategy was like, okay, I'm going to do 6 digital competitions in the next 2 years. That's something that I can commit to doing for myself, and I'll be smart, I'll spread them out a little bit, but in the next 2 years, my goal is to do 6 digital cocktail competitions. Well, one thing I can ask is, well, what's an amount of money I would spend to improve the quality of my digital submission, whether it's my photo or my video, for one competition. And let's say my answer to that is $50. Let's say I would spend $50 to drastically improve the quality of my photo or video for one competition. Well, if you scale that across 6 competitions, that's $300. And if I go on Amazon for the cost of $300, I can purchase lighting equipment, staging equipment, background, light box stuff that is going to definitely move the needle and improve the quality of my video or photo submission by 1 to 2 standard deviations, guaranteed. So that's what I mean. It doesn't need to be thousands of dollars, but you should be thinking of ways that you can spend small amounts of money or small amounts of your own time in educating yourself to radically improve the quality of the digital assets that you're creating. The downside, of course, of a digital competition is the limited reach that you're going to achieve. It might be huge reach, but it's going to be huge reach all at once, and that's going to dry up. So you get the resume bullet point, you can add finalist or winner in your Instagram and LinkedIn profiles, and that's about it. So the way that I think about digital competitions is as stepping stones to bigger and better things, which again, if you're thinking of things as stepping stones, what's the trajectory that you're using those stepping stones to achieve? The other nice thing about digital competitions is the learning. I think that learning is a great reason to do these, and because they're low barrier to entry, low pressure, they're a great place to explore. So I encourage people to focus with digital competitions on transferable skills, not stuff, learning about an obscure Amaro that's hosting a cocktail competition is not necessarily a transferable skill. Yes, it might impress 1 or 2 people who come into your bar, but it's not going to be something that gives you a ton of benefit down the road, like learning how to use lighting and video equipment if you plan on doing more of these cocktail competitions. So I like to focus on transferable skills. Another really great hack for this, I guess it's a hack. It just sounds like talking to people, but not going it alone. And there's many ways that this could look in a digital competition. One way could be to find somebody who's a more skilled other, so somebody who's had success in cocktail competitions or is at least kind of on the same par with you, and say, hey, I'm planning on doing this competition. How about you? Would you be interested in also doing it? We can workshop each other's concepts. I can record for you, you can record for me. I'll be an extra set of hands when staging photos. That's one way it could look. Now, another way could be like, maybe if you're like me and you're a terrible photographer, you could say, well, I have a photographer friend. I wonder if they're interested. They mostly do weddings, mostly portraits, weddings. Maybe they'd be interested if I give them a ring and say, hey, you want to come over this weekend? I'll make you lunch. I'll make you drinks. And if we could use the best photo that you take of these drinks for my cocktail competition, that would be great. So there are ways, even if you're not an expert in the digital content creation space, to not go it alone and to bring in other people and learn from them. I've spent a ton of time watching photographers take pictures of cocktails, and even though I don't have nearly as good equipment as they do, I at least can do a number of basic moves, like searching out natural light, certain staging things that move the needle for me. And finally, in the digital space, you don't have the pressures of your bar, your home bar, holding you down. So if you work at a dive bar and are more interested in serious cocktails, or vice versa. If you work in a bar that tends to use a certain galaxy of ingredients, like Mexican ingredients, so you're making a lot of margaritas, palomas, ranch waters, or Japanese ingredients, you're using a lot of sake and Japanese whiskey and shochu, and you want to branch out and explore a galaxy of ingredients that you don't normally interact with, a digital competition is a great excuse to do that, because it's just your account and entry is low, stakes are low. No big deal if it falls flat on its face. Early on, it's great to explore, and you'll hopefully find some delightful outcomes if you are willing to drop your persona a little bit and see what else is out there. One huge resource that I want to highlight is Jordan Hughes' cocktail camera. Many of you are probably familiar with his work. He came on the Modern Bar Cart podcast, my show, on episode 246, and he's a great resource. If you go to cocktailcamera.com, there's 2 types of free resources that you can grab. You can enter your email and you can get for his mailing list, and you will get his free quick start guide. So it's a PDF that goes over the quick and dirty, like most important things to keep in mind when photographing and videoing cocktails. And then you can also head over to his blog, which has more specific topics. So if you scroll the blog roll, you may encounter something that will help you to improve whatever you're working on. Local competitions are almost the exact inverse or opposite of digital competitions, right? So instead of presenting your cocktails to a bunch of decentralized internet strangers around the world, you are presenting to a bunch of live flesh and blood people who all live in a very concentrated geographical region. In that respect, the outcomes and the things that you want to spend time and focus on are very different. It's great if you're already an entrenched part. It sounds like a lot of folks here, like in the Richmond Guild, like a lot of people like know each other and are like pretty tight. And so my guess is that most local competitions in this area get shared by word of mouth pretty easily. If you're new, if you end up moving markets, seeking out those local competitions is a great way to very rapidly meet the people who are going to be influencers in that specific geographic location. I recommend to people who are considering doing local competitions that the most important investments that you can make is in the people, is in the network. And in a slide or two, we're going to talk more in depth about networking. But my litmus test for the success of a local cocktail competition is, did the guests have a good time? Did you represent yourself well to your fellow bartenders? And did you make the overall event a success to the extent that the host organization, whether that's a bar or an organization like Virginia Spirits, would say, that person right there, they did a great job. If you can do all three of those things, if you asked, did the guests, did my fellow bartenders, and did the hosts, did I comport myself in such a way that all three of those groups of people would look at me and be like, hell yeah, then regardless of whether you won the competition or not, it was still a success for you, because the true value of local cocktail competitions is the networking power. And finally, as you can imagine, it's a great way to apply for a job without actually having to apply for a job. It's a guest shift. It is a way for people to test drive what it would look like for you to be standing behind their bar making drinks for their organization, whether that person is a fellow bartender, a beverage director, or what have you, or even a guest, right? It's a way for you to get in front of guests that don't always just frequent your home bar. Have conversations with them. One local cocktail competition that I want to feature is the Ricky competition that we have every year in DC with the DC Craft Bar Guild. As you can see, it's a decade and a half strong, which is huge for a local competition. Rarely do you see local competitions with such long-standing success. One of the things, this is Ian White, I think he won in 2021 or something. It was the best picture I could find off their Instagram, but I don't think that there's really even a cash prize. I believe this is just a fundraiser for the guild, but everybody, whenever they post about this, it's one of the two highlights of their organizational year, along with the Repeal Day Ball that they have in December. And everybody that goes to the Ricky competition has an absolute blast. And so I just wanted to just shout out a local competition that I think does it well. And you can kind of creep their IG and see what they do to promote that. But to speak a little bit more about networks, I know that growing up for a large part of my life, I thought of networks and networking as dirty words, right? I came from a pretty blue-collar upbringing, and at no point in my life have I felt really well connected in a way that when I went to college, I saw all these legacy admissions in their sororities and fraternities with their parents driving really expensive luxury SUVs. And when I looked at that as somebody coming from a blue-collar upbringing, I was like, I resented it, because I'm like, these people seem to be doing well in life because of who they know and who they're associated with. And it seemed like magic to me. And it seemed dirty in that respect. It's like, it's too easy. That can't be the way the world works. But then as I spent more time in the professional space, I began to understand that networks are systems, and that you actually do have some choices about how you want to operate within those systems. So a couple of terms that I've found that help me to think about networks are closeness centrality and betweenness centrality. When you have closeness centrality, it means that you know everybody and are connected closely with all of the nodes in a specialized network. So if you look at the pink network down here, the black network up there, the central nodes are separated by the external nodes. They're only 1 or 2 degrees separated. So those central nodes in those specialized networks have a great deal of closeness centrality. And the great thing about closeness centrality is that it's extremely efficient because you are closely connected with everybody in that network. It means that it's very profitable if you are in that specialized network. And if the way to make money, if we're honest, is to specialize. And so if you are in a specialized profession in a specific geographic locale, and you plan on being in that locale and really putting down roots there, if you can extrapolate 10 years down the road and be like, yep, I'm still going to be here, then making money through closeness centrality and really entrenching yourself in making connections within that specific bounded geographical and specialized bartender community is how you're going to make money. That's sort of contrasted by betweenness centrality. When you have betweenness centrality, it means that you, like this central green node here, are the kind of person who connects disparate networks. So, for example, we put on the Virginia Cocktail Games. The Virginia Spirits Board and I were able to connect a bunch of bartenders with a bunch of distillers, generally 2 separate networks. You've got a little bit of overlap, but the value that I and the Virginia Spirits Board were able to put out into this competition space was in that sort of betweenness centrality. So I, as a spirits judge, as a podcaster, as somebody who knows a shit ton of bartenders, a shit ton of distillers, and a bunch of cocktail authors, historians, and experts in pretty much every time zone in North America and Europe. I don't know a ton. I don't know every distiller. I don't know every bartender. I don't even know every bartender in DC, which is my home market. But I have ways of putting myself between all these groups of people that has allowed me to give value to the networks that I participate in. So it's just a long-winded way of saying there's different ways that you can participate in networks, and if you think of networking as a dirty word, I'd encourage you to reconsider that. The final thing that I will say about networks is that they contain value, and value flows through the networks. And so even if you look at these local competitions and you're like, that prize isn't worth missing a shift, right? If it's a small cash payout or if it's just a trophy and bragging rights, it's easy to be like, it's not worth skipping a shift. But if you're able to put value into your network by taking part in these activities and by making these connections, the more you put the value into the network, the more value is in the network at large. And it will come back to you, especially the more time you spend, the more centrality you develop, whether it's betweenness or closeness, and the more connections you make. Finally, the big leagues. This is like Diageo World Class. This is like Drink Masters. The application process is grueling, and somebody in some corporate marketing headquarters is going through all of your social profiles looking to rule you out because they don't want a PR disaster on their hands. So you had better make sure that you're doing things and you've got things cleaned up to the point where they're not going to find anything that's going to disqualify you, because otherwise that's sunk effort on your part. Generally, there's going to be like a regional round. You drive to a city in a region, you compete there, and then if you win there, then they'll fly you off to whatever destination on the brand's dime. In terms of what you need to invest in these competitions, it is all about the story. The submission that you are going to ride to your finals appearance there, it needs to be super tight, which means you need to spend a lot of time on it, way more time than you would ever spend on a digital cocktail competition, way more time than you would ever spend on your local competition. It needs to be highly engineered, and yet it needs to feel natural and organic and inevitable. And you can only achieve a product like that through a ton of iteration, a ton of practice. It takes a ton of time. And the nice thing is, this is where the money comes in. This is where you can finally get paid for your efforts. But one thing that you should consider is what the small print is going to entail, because if you think that these big brands are just inviting you for the hell of it, you're drastically mistaken. These are the only people in our industry who make money doing anything, and one thing that's certain is they're going to continue making money off of your back. If you win, it means you are going to help them make money somehow, so you better figure out what that is going to entail before you wake up one day and realize that you are suddenly the US brand ambassador for an obscure liqueur brand in Europe. So, worth considering the small print. This is my friend Mike Vanderhorn at cocktail.complex. Actually, if you have your phone, go to his Instagram right now because there's something that I want you to do if you're interested in cocktail competitions. Mike has actually gone, it's like from couch to 5K. I don't know if any of your gyms do that little program, but Mike has gone from a casual home bartender to an award-winning professional bartender off the back of cocktail competition. So he did the building blocks approach like I was saying at the beginning, where he started with digital competitions and then he worked his way up. He just got flown to Europe for, I want to say Borghetti maybe? Liqueur 43, yep. So he was in Diageo World Class, I want to say 2022, maybe based on the episode number, I would say 2022. I have an interview with him, episode 264, if you want to hear about Diageo World Class and his experience there. So that's a good resource if you're interested in kind of the big leagues. But Mike has a channel, an Instagram channel on his Instagram where he lists and others list cocktail competitions that are upcoming. So like even just this morning, there was one that he posted about from Amaro Montenegro. So it's a great way to just have passive reminders on your social media feed about cocktail competitions that are coming up, deadlines that are coming up, and you'll also get to see how Mike does his submissions too. He's a super fun guy and has had a lot of success building his brand using cocktail competitions. Yes.
It just says cocktail competition information. I'm gonna hit join.
Yep, join that, and you'll just get a notification in your just when you're scrolling your notifications when there's a new post about it. So it's a cool little tool that has definitely grown over the last year. I think in this episode when he was like, I'm going to create a channel. So in the last year or two, it's really grown. Okay, any questions before we get into the nitty gritty stuff? This is all the high level stuff, believe it or not. Cool, let's go. When I think about telling a story using flavor, using cocktail as a vehicle for storytelling, there's a number of strategies that I try to deploy. One of them is simplicity. And when I think of when I ask the question, what's the heart of this drink? What is the heart and soul of what I'm creating and trying to sell to these judges in a way that they are going to crown me the winner of this competition? One of the things that's important is simplicity. You need to be able to encapsulate the core of your drink and what it is trying to do in a single word or phrase. So it could be something as simple as refreshment, or it could be the terroir of X location, right? But to be able to sum up the core of what you're trying to achieve is really valuable because then you can go through all the little details of the story that you're telling and of the drink, all the ingredients and the components of your drink, and you can ask, is this detail in service of that one core component, that one word or phrase? Is this in service of that? Is this contributing to that project that I'm working on? Now, simplicity, it would seem on the surface, is sort of opposed to complexity, or what I would call surface area. And as important as it is to be able to summarize the project of your cocktail in a single word or phrase, another key truth is that people don't fall in love with big kind of sketchy ideas. They fall in love with little details. And what I mean by surface area is the same thing that coopers mean by surface area when they char a barrel 1, 2, 3, 4, right? The longer you burn a barrel, the more nooks and crannies are in that barrel. That means more liquid can seep into those nooks and crannies and grab more flavor. Now, that might not always be what you're after when you're making a bourbon, but in terms of surface area in your story, the more nooks and crannies, the more people, the more landscapes, the more anecdotes that you can build into the story of your cocktail, chances are somebody who is evaluating you is going to fall in love with one of those, right? You probably found that in your presentation, right? There was a lot of nooks and crannies in your presentation, right? All right, drop 3. This is a principle I stole from improv comedy, and this is more in the idea generation space. The notion is this. The first joke you think of is the obvious joke. The second joke is the sex joke or the poop joke, and the third joke is the obscure joke or the one that's only going to make sense to you and a very small percentage of other people. So what happens if we drop all of those? Usually, after you drop past the obvious stuff, the juvenile stuff, and the idiosyncratic stuff, that's where the gold is. So I always encourage, as you're trying to develop these cocktails, think about, take a little bit of time. See if you don't necessarily chase after your first idea. Keep it there, keep it on the list, but keep making that list. See what else is there if you can go beyond that. And then finally, you need to be considering your audience. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing an opportunity to customize the story that you're telling to the people who are going to be listening to it and evaluating you. So for example, if you're competing in a cocktail competition like the Florida Cagna sustainability one, well, you should probably have your sustainability on point, and the sustainability should probably be a big talking point. If you're presenting your cocktail to a panel of distillers, you had better know the mash bill of that bourbon because they're going to care about that, right? So thinking about your audience is a way for you to customize the story that you're telling so that you're going to get the results that you want. A little case study here, Julieta. Thank you for allowing me to feature your cocktail here. The Bad Apple, beautiful photograph. This cocktail did a lot of the things that I just walked through, so I want to kind of explain, and feel free to correct me if I'm incorrect on any of this, Julieta. But in terms of drop 3, well, one thing Julieta knew is that this is the Virginian Cocktail Games. There's going to be a lot of whiskey. It's a cocktail competition, so somebody's probably going to be rocking gin. Whiskey and gin, maybe I won't use those. She was able to locate the one distillery in Virginia that makes an American agave spirit. And so we knew that was not going to be a very crowded space in this competition, so it was a way for her to differentiate, and it just so happens it tied in perfectly with her own story. Spending time in Texas, having Mexican heritage, fantastic. So the drop 3, extremely effective. In terms of simplicity, this drink evolved a little bit in terms of the formulation. It started out as more of an old-fashioned build, and then it kind of evolved into a split modifier Manhattan Negroni type thing. But ultimately, it's a very familiar build. It's a stirred boozy sipper on the rocks, plus apple. Everything was infused with apple. The vermouth was fortified with apple brandy. The pommeau over here was another apple ingredient, and Julieta kind of rounded everything out with a homemade apple peppercorn syrup. So familiar build plus apple. That's the simple concept. Great. I can understand this immediately. Surface area. A couple amazing presentational nooks and crannies that Julieta built in here. One is this smoked peppercorn rosary, which I loved. And that was an outgrowth of actually going to the distillery and talking with Peter. Peter, you mentioned the peppercorns. He brought out these cubebs. Yep. So Peter came out with some cubeb peppers, which was a botanical that he used in another spirit that he makes. And Julieta was able to fashion these into a custom garnish. Now, she only had to make 4 of these. 3 for the judges, 1 for photography. So she could burn the time on that. That's an investment that was worth it. And then, of course, the peppercorn rosary it ties into the story of the bad apple. It represents both the rebellion, the smoke, and the thing that's being rebelled against, right? Something organized like religion. And then finally, hand-cut ice. Again, not necessarily sustainable if you're a bar program, but if you only got to make 4 of these over the course of a day, it made sense. So Julieta weighed out her hand-cut ice so that all the wash lines that the judges received were going to be exactly the same, but it was going to be something handcrafted for each judge, something completely non-replicable that each judge received. And I personally love those little handmade touches. And then finally, in terms of the audience, well, she knew that she was going to have to present to professional judges, but then also there was going to be a People's Choice round. And the nice thing about Julieta's cocktail, it was probably the easiest to batch. There was no citrus involved, which meant that, she could pretty much batch everything completely ahead of time, put the bar back, the assistant in charge of prepping the cocktails so that she had more time and bandwidth to interact with the people on the floor. So all four of these kind of played into Julieta's cocktail, and I thought that it made an excellent case study. Now, this is a custom. I didn't steal that one from Mixology Memes. I made this one myself. In terms of wowing the judges, let's talk about people. So let's just get People's Choice out of the way. Love it or hate it, there are ways to win People's Choice votes. Every cheap trick will work. This is totally pandering. This is not rocket science. You need to go low. Go low, do not go high. Pink drinks, I find, always win. I have never seen a pink drink that has not won a People's Choice competition. I have done it myself. I have entered People's Choice competitions and said, I don't know anything else about what I'm making. I just know it's going to be pink, and it's consistent. So pink drinks, bubbles, selfie stations, silly garnishes, anything that you can do for the gram, anything that you can do to draw a crowd is going to help you win a People's Choice competition. Simplify with a flourish is an important one here. And this is something I tried to emphasize for the Virginia Cocktail Games. You need to make your service as easy as possible, but you still want people to feel like when they come by your station, they're getting a handcrafted touch on each drink. And Amanda and Henry did excellent jobs with that. And I think one of the things that proved, like you two won the People's Choice, you had the most votes for a People's Choice, and you also had, I have no way of quantifying this, but you kept people at your tables the longest to talk to them, and you made each group that cycled in stood there for a while, which means if you stand for a while, if you give someone your time and then you don't give them your People's Choice vote, that's a sunk cost fallacy. So if you spend the time with someone, you spend the time getting to know someone's story, and that person really puts a lot of care into preparing something for you, you want to give something back to them. So simplify with a flourish, and then the best drink, the $20 drink at the Speakeasy Cocktail Bar is not going to win the People's Choice competition. So just readjust your expectations on that front. That's all I'll say. When you're actually telling the story, especially to the judges, I really enjoy a little piece of advice from the poet Emily Dickinson, tell the truth, but tell it slant. People like familiar stories. People resort to these basic archetypes, right? The hero's journey. But we like when they have a fresh spin on them. We like it when people make us feel like they're fresh and new. So, when you're thinking about telling your story, you do want to balance the clarity of the story. This goes back to that simplicity thing. You want to make sure that you've got a simple story, but if you don't take that opportunity to put your own spin on it, then that means that you're not connecting yourself to that cocktail. You're merely presenting the cocktail. You are not tied to that cocktail, meaning that you're sort of expendable, right? But if you customize that story, then suddenly you become indispensable from the thing that you are trying to sell to the judges. And that is crucially important. Also, show, don't tell. This is a tough one. It's easy in principle, but in practice, it's real hard. And a lot of people who presented at the Virginia Cocktail Games, I wouldn't say made the mistake, because it's something that a lot of people do, but didn't sometimes take the opportunity to show rather than tell. Judges are brought in as judges because they're smart. They're good at analyzing stuff. So they don't need you to tell them what every little thing in your cocktail, quote, symbolizes or, quote, represents. It's a cocktail. The ingredients symbolize that cocktail hopefully tasting good. To me, right? If there happens to be something above and beyond that, then great. Walk me up to it and let me fall into that discovery on my own. Don't bang me over the head with it, because you could be doing so much else, hospitality-wise, craft-wise, flair-wise, in the time that it tells you to bang somebody over the head with this symbolizes this. Just walk them up to it and let them discover it on their own, because then they feel smart. They feel validated in what they were brought in to do, which was analyze the product that you put out. And then in the process of creating your story, you practice, you get real serious about it, because you just, again, we're talking about sunk costs. You just sunk a lot of time into creating this cocktail. You can get really serious about it. And so one of the things I like to do when I'm trying to figure out, when I've got everything kind of 90% there and the competition's coming up, so I like to ask, is there a way to insert a little bit of fun or a little bit of joy, a little bit of surprise, a little bit of entertainment value back into this? Now that I've got my story down and the serious important parts are taken care of, can we spend a little time, can we build in and engineer a little bit of time for magic and spontaneity and the things that people come to cocktail bars to experience, so that the judges delight in that as well? The judges are just ultimately really important guests at your cocktail bar. And then finally, this is the last slide here, presenting well. So last slide was more about storytelling tactics. This is about the actual, now you're in front of the judges, okay? Mise en place is important because if you practice with, let's say you're practicing at your place of employment, at your bar has idiosyncrasies, you can almost guarantee that those idiosyncrasies are not going to be copy-pasted into the place you are competing. So try and make your mise en place somewhat translatable when you are practicing, somewhat translatable so that you can copy and paste it to the greatest extent possible. If you can do that, that's stuff that you don't have to worry about, that's not going to distract you during your final presentation. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Rushing is a terrible look. We tend to run off at the mouth a little bit. We tend to talk more than we need to when we're nervous. And I don't care how well you prepared or, like how much experience you have with cocktail competitions. We all get a little bit nervous and a little bit jittery. We maybe drink a little bit too much caffeine before we're going to present, and that can have consequences in terms of how we come off. One thing I loved. Do you remember? What did I love? Can you guess?
No, I'm curious now.
Remember when you had to do?
Oh, and
you had a full like 2.5 ounce pour, right?
Yeah.
So we fill. You're about to fill this jig, and you're like,
I'm shaking.
You're like, this isn't going to work.
Stop shaking.
Right? So, but perfect. You're like, But that, like, imagine, like, so you botch the pour. That looks bad. Now you don't have the right measurements in your shakers. That affects the drink that you then have to serve the judges. That has cascading effects. So the fact that you were like, not going to work, smile at the judges, pour, right? So that was a great in-person example of slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Boom. We're going to brace, smile while we do it, and keep going. That was fantastic. I love that. So a couple things that I tried to emphasize in Virginia Cocktail Games. They had 10 minutes to present. You need to be timing yourself, because if you serve the judges at minute 9, they're not going to have time to taste your drink and ask you the right type of informed questions that are going to allow you to give the right type of informed answers that make you look good. So as you practice, you should plan to have the cocktail in the hands of the judges well before your time elapses, and you should try to build in space for crowd work, actually connecting with the judges, because will they sit there and stare at you blankly? Absolutely. That's all they will do unless you engage with them like they are guests at your cocktail bar, which is how you should be thinking of them. So build in that time. The last thing here, I think I've saved the best for last. It might not look all that impressive, but the best way to memorize a presentation is to build for yourself a sort of memory palace, because every cocktail is a story, and the act of composing that cocktail has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? You've got raw ingredients, the transformative process, and the point of service. Beginning, middle, end. Just like a narrative arc, okay? And that means that along the way, every bottle pickup, every transformation, every shake, every strain, every garnish is an opportunity to embed a memory cue of some part of the story that you are telling. So for me, when I have to memorize a lot of information, I'm always embedding these little memory cues in the landscape. So if we're pouring the whiskey right now, guess what we're talking about? We're talking about the whiskey. And the best thing about creating a sort of memory palace or a story landscape in the process of making your cocktail for these judges is that it gives you two-way coverage if you mess something up or forget something. If you forget what you need to say next in your story, well, look what's in your hands. Oh, that. got to talk about this. Smile at the judges and proceed. Recovery. If, on the other hand, you get so focused and zeroed in on connecting with the judges and communicating to them that you're like, uh-oh, what are my hands supposed to be doing? Well, what did you just say? There we are. Found my spot in the landscape, found my spot in the memory palace, and now I can pick up the next bottle I need. So to embed memory cues in your practice process is a huge way of basically accepting that there's going to be variables outside of your control on the day of your presentation to the judges, but owning your story to the extent that it doesn't matter if there's variables outside of your control, because you can always reground yourself in that memory palace or landscape and use a memory cue to get yourself back on track. So that is primarily what I had for you today. I know that was a lot, and I know it's a big monologue, but I'd be happy to chat and answer any questions you may have.